Okay, so we were speaking about these true leaders like Moses and King David were the two examples we brought, where each time they had a choice in front of them to side with the nation of Israel or with the people that they were leading, and or side with God. They always chose, if you recall, they always chose the people of Israel, which is really a sign of true leadership, even if that meant that this would be considered a sin in the eyes of God. Why are we speaking about this? Because we're speaking now about the tzaddik, or at least the incomplete tzaddik, as defined by the Tanya. The incomplete tzaddik, as defined by the Tanya, is a person that has no evil. His evil is completely dormant, and therefore his evil doesn't even attract him. Doesn't have any attraction to anything that stands opposite God. So why is it? The question was, why is it that they quote unquote sinned, even though it's questionable whether their sins are really sins? And that's because they sinned when they had to choose between God and the people of Israel. And as true leaders, they chose the people of Israel, which is really what a leader is all about, even if it comes to his own detriment. So that was the context of these examples of Moses and King David, also, which demonstrated what true leadership is all about. That's just to recap. Let's continue, as you mentioned, Margot, at the bottom of page 253, right here. Right, let's go. Does anyone want to read? Okay.
I'll read.
Thank you, Margot. Go.
Okay. In our reality, we face problems with no clear, unambiguous solution. The question of whether something is a mitzvah or a sin, or a mitzvah best neglected, or a sin that is perhaps necessary to commit, does not always have an answer. The Talmud blames the destruction of the temple and the exile of Israel on the humility of Zachariah ben Zachariah, I guess, wanted to act with complete righteousness and honesty without deviating in the slightest from truth. However, had he been less rigid in the situation, had he been prepared to sin a little, the temple might not have been destroyed. The final reckoning, what are mitzvot and what are sins, is not for us to decide, because some of the factors are beyond reckoning, even for the complete tzaddik.
Right. So I think that what Rabbi Shtanzi is speaking about here stands at the very core of Judaism, and I would say especially of Judaism in our modern day and age. Because the question is, how flexible can you be with the mitzvot, with the laws of the Torah? It's clear what are mitzvot and what are sins, what one should do and what one should not do, right? We have 613 commandments, and those are pretty clear. Yes, we have commentaries on each and every one of them, but the bottom line is pretty clear. Do not murder means do not murder. Respect your parents means respect your parents. What exactly does it entail? Fine, so you have many sub-laws attached to these commandments, but it's pretty clear. The question is, when it comes into context that can affect people. So the example that is brought here is Charia ben Avkulas. Just to go to the source of it, I'll share with you what the Talmud says about Charia ben Avkulas. And it says that because of the scrupulousness of Charia ben Avkulas, we were exiled. Now, Charia ben Avkulas was a righteous man. What was the story all about? The story, if you recall, is the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. There was a man who had a party, and he decided to tell his servant, go and bring my best friend to the party. You have to invite him. His name is Kamsa. And the guy didn't hear well, and he heard Bar Kamsa. The problem was Bar Kamsa was the host's enemy, not his best friend. So here this man is having a whole party, and of course this is before Evite or before internet, so you couldn't quite confirm your guest list beforehand. The guy just appears. He thought he was invited, but this was again the guy's enemy, not his best friend. His best friend is Kamsa, the servant who was sent to invite Kamsa by mistake. Invited Bar Kamsa, was the guy's enemy. So he shows up, and the host says to Bar Kamsa, leave. I hate you. You're my enemy. No one invited you here. He said, well, I was invited, but it was a mistake. I want you to leave. And the guy's humiliated. He said, what if I pay you half of my meal? No, I don't want you to. What if I pay you the entirety of my meal? I don't want you to. Leave. So what if I pay you for the whole party? I'll be your sponsor. He says, I don't want you to. I hate you. Leave. Now the guy's humiliated. And he leaves. And he's upset not just at the host, but he's upset at the sages who were there at the party and kept quiet. How dare they stand silent in the face of such humiliation. So now he wants to take his revenge. What does he do? He goes to the Roman governor of Jerusalem, where they were living, and he says to the Roman governor, look, the Jewish people want to rebel against you. That's how upset he was. He wanted to take revenge on everybody. How do you know that they want to rebel against me? So he says to the governor, look, try and bring a sacrifice to their temple in Jerusalem, and you'll see that they'll refuse it. Fine. He says, that's a good test. Let me test them. The Roman governor goes with his entourage, and he brings a kosher animal to sacrifice to the Jerusalem temple. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas says, should we not? Because these sacrifices have to be by certain people during certain times. Should we not accept this animal? And then what this Bar Kamsa was so upset, because he was so upset, he wanted to take his revenge. He knew that they might accept the animal because under rare circumstances, especially circumstances that can put the safety of the Jewish people in danger, you're allowed to accept an animal like that. But what he did is that he made a blemish in the animal. Blemish that was not seen. Blemish, I think it was on the lip of the animal that wasn't really seen, but nonetheless a blemish. Now, a blemished animal you cannot accept in the Jerusalem temple. It's disrespectful to God to bring a blemished animal. So now they're examining the animal. And again, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkula says, it's blemished. We can't accept it. So Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkula put his foot down and he said, sorry, Roman governor, we can't accept your animal. Of course, Roman governor being told by Kamsa that the Jewish people want to rebel against him, put 2 and 2, the wrong 2 and 2, but he still put 2 and 2 together, and he said, oh, you see, he was right. They don't want to accept my animal. That means they want to rebel against me. And from that point on, the relationship between the Romans and the Jews severed, and eventually it led to the destruction of the temple by the Romans. Now, again, the Talmud concludes that Anvatanuto shel Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas echriva et Yerushalayim, that the scrupulousness, the strictness, or maybe the narrow-mindedness of Zechariah ben Avkulas is what caused the destruction of the temple. And by the way, not just the destruction, but the exile that it led to, right? We were exiled for 2,000 years from that point on. Now, Rabbi Shnaz is mentioning this in his commentary because here you have strict laws. Yes, blemished animal is not allowed in the temple. An animal from a foreign source, not at the right time, is also not allowed at the temple. So we have commandments, 613 commandments. But can we look at the bigger picture? Are we allowed to sin sometimes against those commandments for the greater good? And in a way, I think that this, as mentioned, I think this speaks really to the core of what it means to be Jewish and to live in the Judaism that is healthy and at the same time big-minded, not narrow-minded, that is able to see the entire picture, even if it comes to the detriment of some commandments. Now, of course, you need to be a righteous man to be able to make those decisions. You can't just say yes to everything. You have to come from a point of knowledge and point of righteousness, a point of big picture. But on the other hand, that's really what it means to be a tzaddik. Here, the commentary is in the context of a tzaddik. A tzaddik has to, we hold the tzaddik accountable for not being able to see the big picture, because the tzaddik means that you can see the big picture. And I think that in a way, I think it stands at the very, very core of maybe the schism that we have in the Jewish world today. Because on the one hand, we have people that are so detailed oriented that they forget to look at the big picture. They have to check all the boxes and they're obsessed with that. But unfortunately, that comes in the way of the simple, as they call it in Yiddish, Menschlichkeit, the simple being mensches, right? There's a great story about the Chafetz Chaim, who was once invited by family for Shabbat dinner, and the man said Kiddush, and then the Rabbi Chafetz Chaim said to the man, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave." Says, "Why is my food not kosher enough for you?" Of course it's kosher. Is there anything wrong that I did on Shabbat, that I would violate the Shabbat? Maybe that's why. No, not at all. I trust you. You checked all the boxes. You follow all the commandments. The problem is that I saw you doing Kiddush. Now, during Kiddush, we have to cover the chalot, right? And why do you cover the challah when you say Kiddush? Because we say that we don't want the challah to be embarrassed, that we're giving too much attention to the wine. That's how sensitive we have to be, even towards challah. And the man got all upset at his wife because the challahs were not covered, and that was her job, to cover the challahs. So he got all upset. She was humiliated, and of course she immediately covered the challahs, and then he proceeded with doing Kiddush. But the Chafetz Chaim said, a man that is so obsessed with the details that he forgets the ABC of Judaism, to treat others, especially your wife, with respect, that's not a man I want to be in the company of. So I have to leave. There you go. So you see, you have the scrupulousness. People are obsessed with details that forget the big picture. Another great story about the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement, was known as Srulik. That's how they called him before he was revealed, before his greatness was exposed. He was a very humble man, and he didn't want to reveal himself until he was almost forced to, because people noticed how great he was. But before he was so famous, or before his holiness was exposed, he had multiple jobs. One of his first jobs was to be a shochet, a slaughterer of chicken, so that there's chicken are slaughtered in the kosher way. And then he became an assistant teacher, not a teacher, an assistant teacher, Ozer Melamed, and so on. But when he was a shochet, he did his job, and he at one point he decided, okay, I have to move on to becoming an assistant teacher. So he gave the job to someone else who was a very qualified shochet, a very qualified slaughterer of chicken. After a few days, the people who were working with the new slaughterer of chicken, the shochet, they came to Srulik, the Baal Shem Tov, and they said to Srulik, "Gosh, you gave us someone that doesn't know what he's doing." Baal Shem Tov, how could it be? I know the guy. He knows all the laws. He's great at being a shochet. What's wrong with him? And the people said to Srulik, you don't understand. When they clean the knife between each and every shchita, slaughtering of chicken, because you have to clean your knife, they clean it with regular water. When you cleaned your knife between each and every shchita, you cleaned it with your tears. Mm. Why? Because it pained him to do another chicken. He really wanted to, was so sensitive, so saw the big picture. It wasn't just a robot slaughtering chicken. But again, that's what a tzaddik is. Now, on the flip side of it, in the Jewish world today, I think maybe throughout history too, we've had people who said, well, let's only look at the big picture. Yes, we have to be all about feelings and sensitivity, and who cares about the details? You really think that God cares if I eat this hot dog or that hot dog? Do you really think that it's all about, loving humanity? Love. All we need is love. Now, there's of course validity to that, but the details also, as we all know, in anything, for a plane to fly, every nail needs to be in place. For a student to receive a good grade in school, he needs to have every piece of knowledge affirmed. So the details are very important too, but the love also is so important. We need both. And I think there's a schism in which, unfortunately, people are sometimes too obsessed with details and they forget the sensitivity, the love, the Menschlichkeit, as we call it. Some people are the opposite. They're all into Menschlichkeit, which is great, but there's no details. Without details, you can't really continue on the tradition either. You can continue on really the heritage of a people. So the ultimate, as Rabbi Steinsaltz is pointing out here, is to have both. Not to be Scharia ben Havkula says, but also not to be detached completely from the 613 commandments. And that's tough. But for that, one needs to at least strive to be a tzaddik, to be able to see the full picture. I feel like I spoke too much, so please feel free to share your comments or disagreements. There's another, and please, I don't know if you're trying to speak, maybe you should unmute yourself. Make sure you're unmuted if you are. But I'll share with you just another great story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe that is semi personal, because my brother-in-law, some of you know my sister Karen, she's married to Misha, and Misha's uncle Daniel Namdar was quite close to the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, and at one point he decided to gift him a gift. What was the gift? He said to himself, the Rebbe is receiving letters from across the world every day, sometimes 1,000 letters a day, and it would save him time if I could buy him an electrical machine opener of envelopes. Why? Because, he just pure mathematics, right? Every letter takes, 5 seconds to open? This machine can open it in 2 seconds. So he bought this gift, and the rabbi immediately rejected it. He said, thank you, but no thank you. So he said to himself, well, maybe that's because the machine makes too much noise.
Yeah.
So I'll buy a machine that's noiseless. And he went looking for a machine like that, and he found a machine that was noiseless, much more expensive. He gave it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe again said, thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah.
He was intrigued. Why? This will save you time. And the Rebbe said, that's because when people write to me, some people seal their letters with saliva, right? As most people do. But he said, some people seal their letters with their tears. And those tears I need to feel.
Wow.
So I can't have an electrical machine. But here we go. The similar story to Srulik, the Baal Shem Tov. You have a tzaddik that really cares about the big picture. It treats everyone as one whole person, not just the detail that you're talking about in your letter. And that's the way we ought to treat people, really. That's to see the person behind the question, the person behind the problem, not just the problem itself. And that's what it means. Schar ben Avkulos did not have that, and that led to the destruction of the temple. Schar ben Avkulos was a very pious man. The man who engaged in fasting a lot, many stories about it. But at the end of the day, if you can't see the person behind the problem, or the situation behind the problem in his case, then we miss the whole point. Anyway, and even, by the way, again, to repeat what was said last week, even if this comes to the detriment of the human being, Schar ben Avkulos, let's just imagine that he would have said that this blemished animal is allowed. I'm sure he would have been violently attacked by his peers, saying, how dare you allow an animal like this? He would have come to his own detriment in many ways. But that's what a tzaddik is, really willing to take the stance because he sees the person behind the picture, the situation behind the problem, not just the problem itself. Tell you a story. I don't know if I shared this with you, but just one last one, and then we can continue. But I think it's just such an important point. That's why I want to emphasize it. But I heard the story from Rabbi Steinsaltz, who said that Jerusalem was never a rich city. People in Jerusalem were always poor until today. Jerusalem, I think, is the poorest or the second poorest city in Israel. But 100 years ago, the situation was terrible. People were struck with poverty. And there was a wedding happening. And of course, they may have gone into debts for this wedding, but it was a very modest wedding. And during the wedding, all of a sudden, someone comes running out of the kitchen saying that we won't be able to eat the meat. The main course is not going to be taken out. Why? Because the main course was the course of meat. And unfortunately, someone by mistake bumped into a big jar of milk. That jar of milk fell into the meat. Of course, we can't eat a mixture of meat and milk unless there is 60 times the amount of meat against the milk. Then it's nullified, and then you're allowed to eat the milk. The meat. Now, there wasn't 60 times the amount of meat against this milk. So people said, sorry, we're going to have to cancel the main course. It's not going to happen. Now, not only was this going to destroy in many ways the wedding of this poor couple, the main course is a main course that adds happiness, but also you took a meal, an essential meal from people who were poor, otherwise would not have eaten. The chief rabbi of Jerusalem who was at the wedding was Rabbi Shmuel of Salant. And he said, hey, let's not reach this conclusion so quickly. Let me go and inquire. He left for about half an hour and he came back and he said to everybody, I have good news. You're all allowed to eat this meat. The main course will take place. So his students came and said, well, how could you do that? There wasn't 60 times the amount of meat against the milk. He said, yes, there was. When I disappeared for 30 minutes, I went to my neighbor. My neighbor's a milkman. And I asked him, how much water do you add in the milk from the time it is taken out of the cow until the time it is bottled? And I made a simple calculation. The amount of real milk was nullified 60 times by the meat because a lot of it is water. But here's a man, you see, who saw the situation, connected to it, felt for it, and tried to find a way out. And he did. But this is really what being a tzaddik is about. Anyhow. Okay, let's continue. 254, unless, of course, please feel free to speak your mind. All right, 254, the explanation of the matter.
Yeah.
Please, anyone, Margot.
Okay, I'll continue. The explanation of the matter is that a complete tzaddik in whom the evil has been converted to good and who is consequently called a tzaddik to whom is good, achieves this by completely removing the soiled garments of evil. That is to say, he utterly despises the pleasures of this world, the enjoyment of human pleasures, not for the sake of the service of God, but merely to gratify the body's desires, because they are derived from and nourished by klipa and sitra akra.
Right. Just let's go to the commentary for 2 or 3 lines here. Yeah.
The idea that a person can engage in a physical activity simply to derive enjoyment from it, that a person can eat something simply because it is tasty, is for the complete tzaddik an abomination that the mind cannot bear. A chassid of our own generation traveled to America and wrote back home the profoundly shocking observation that here in America, people actually drink wine and eat meat for pleasure. A Jew can then be shocked by the sight of people simply eating to enjoy themselves without pangs of conscience and without even pretending that they are doing it for a holy purpose.
Right. And that's really the definition of a complete tzaddik, that a complete tzaddik doesn't engage in the pleasures of this world at all just to have pleasures. It might engage in the pleasures of this world, like have a good cup of wine to honor the Shabbat. That's a different story. Then you're doing it for Shabbat. But just to have self-pleasure from any type of pleasure in this world, that's not even in the lexicon of the tzaddik, of the complete tzaddik, because that's self-serving. And the tzaddik, to put it in other words here, is completely other-serving. He sees himself as a channel, and only a channel to serve God. And therefore, anything that has any iota of being self-serving is not a part of the tzaddik's life, including drinking wine or eating meat just for pleasure, like it is in America, as this chassid called it.